You have people you know. A decent number of them, actually. Co-workers you get along with well. Old friends from different chapters of your life, still connected to you on your phone. People who would probably show up to your wedding if you had one. People you could text right now who would text back. You are not, by any standard definition, lonely in the obvious sense. You are surrounded, in the loose way that modern life surrounds people, by other people. But there is nobody you would call at 2 in the morning. There is nobody who knows what is actually happening in your life right now. Not the public version, not the one you would post, but what is actually going on. There is nobody who has seen you in the full range of your states, the high ones and the low ones, and the confusing ones in between. There is nobody to whom you are genuinely, consistently, deeply known. And the strangest part is that you cannot quite identify when this happened. There was no single event, nobody left, nobody hurt you badly enough to explain the distance. The friendships didn't end, they just stopped going anywhere. They leveled out at a certain depth and stayed there, and you stayed there with them. And at some point you looked up and realized that the connections you have, numerous as they are, do not include the one thing that actually matters. Someone who truly knows you. Someone who you have let all the way in. Someone who would notice specifically and with detail if you disappeared. This is the psychology of people who have no close friends as adults, and it is one of the quietest epidemics of our time. Not dramatic enough to be called a crisis by the people living it, just a slow, undramatic accumulation of surface connections where depth was supposed to be. Adult friendship requires something that most adults are running low on. It requires time that isn't scheduled around obligation. It requires repeated, unstructured contact, the kind where you are not together for a reason, but simply together. It requires the willingness to be seen in multiple contexts, including the ones that are not your best. And it requires vulnerability. Not dramatic vulnerability, not confession or crisis, just the ordinary daily vulnerability of letting someone know what is actually going on with you, what you are worried about, what you are trying to figure out, what is harder than you expected, what you want that you have not said out loud yet. Most adults stop providing most of these things, not because they become bad friends, because life closes in, work takes the time, relationships take the energy, children, if you have them, take everything that is left, and friendships, the ones that are not structured around obligation, the ones that exist purely because two people chose each other, are the first thing to compress when space runs out. Not abandoned, just deprioritized, just allowed to exist at a lower level of intensity without anyone consciously deciding that this is what they are doing. And then something else happens. The longer you go without deep connection, the harder it becomes to initiate it. There is a particular kind of social awkwardness that comes from realizing you have known someone for years and still exist entirely on the surface with them. That to go deeper now would require some kind of transition that neither of you has the vocabulary for. That to suddenly say something real to someone you have been keeping at a certain depth would feel strange to both of you. So you don't, and the surface level continues, and the years accumulate. There is also the attrition of geography and life stages. The people you were closest to in your 20s moved to different cities, married people you don't know as well, had children on a different timeline, entered careers that took them in different directions, and replacing those friendships in adulthood is genuinely hard in a way that nobody prepares you for. Because adult friendships don't form the way they did in school, in the proximity and repetition of daily shared life. They require active construction in a way that feels effortful in a world that already asks too much effort for everything else. So the connections you have stay where they are, pleasant, functional, and not quite what you need.
There are practical reasons this happens, but there are also psychological ones. And the psychological ones are harder to look at because they require admitting something about yourself rather than about circumstance. The first psychological reason is that depth requires risk. And somewhere along the way, most adults developed a very clear and well-learned understanding of what happens when you risk depth and it doesn't work. When you share something real and the other person doesn't meet you there. When you invest in a friendship and it fades anyway. When you let someone in and they leave or drift or disappoint you in ways that small talk never could. The surface level is safe in a way that depth is not. Nothing can go wrong at the surface that hurts very much. And after enough experience of depth not working, after enough friendships that faded despite real investment, the nervous system draws its conclusions. Stay shallow. It costs less. The second psychological reason is that depth requires you to be interesting to yourself. And many adults, underneath the capable functioning surface, are not sure they are. They have not spent enough time with their own inner world to know what they would even share if they chose to share it. They have been so busy managing the external requirements of their life that the internal landscape has become unfamiliar. And you cannot offer depth to another person when you do not have access to your own depth. You cannot let someone know you when you have spent years not knowing yourself. The third, and perhaps the most honest reason, is fear of being a burden. The person who has no close friends as an adult often carries a deep, unexamined belief that their need for closeness is excessive, that wanting depth makes them needy, that reaching out too much, sharing too much, needing too much of another person's attention is an imposition that will eventually make people want less of them. And so they don't reach out too much. They don't share too much. They manage the size of their need carefully, and in managing it carefully, they ensure it is never met. The fourth, and perhaps the most honest reason, is that intimacy is unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable in a dramatic way, just unfamiliar. Like a room in a house you grew up in that was always kept closed. You knew it was there. You probably wondered about it, but you never spent any time in it, and so you have no natural sense of how to be in it. And when someone opens the door and invites you in, you don't quite know how to move through the space. You default to what you know, which is the hallway, which is the surface, which is fine and pleasant, and not what you actually needed. Depth was not modeled for you. It was not practiced, and you cannot do easily what you have never been shown how to do. The absence of close friendship is often not a failure of effort. It is the entirely predictable result of a person trying to build something they were never taught the blueprints for. It feels like being full and hungry at the same time. Your social calendar is not empty. There are people to see, events to attend, connections to maintain, and yet there is a specific hunger that none of it satisfies. A hunger for the kind of conversation that goes somewhere real, for the kind of presence that doesn't require you to perform, for the specific relief of being with someone who already knows the backstory and doesn't need the version you curate for people who are still at the surface. It feels like keeping a secret from everyone you know, not a dramatic secret, just the ongoing secret of your actual inner life, what you are really thinking about, what is really worrying you, what you actually want from your life that you have not admitted to anyone yet. That secret lives inside you, growing over the years because there is nobody to tell it to, not because nobody would listen, because you have not created the conditions in which telling it would be possible. You have kept everyone at exactly the distance that keeps the secret safe, and the secret has become a kind of loneliness you carry without naming. It also feels, and this is the part that is most uncomfortable to admit, like your own fault. Because you can see, if you are honest, the moments where you could have gone deeper and didn't. The conversation where you deflected instead of disclosed. The invitation to spend more time with someone that you accepted as less than they offered. The person who was clearly trying to get closer and to whom you gave just enough to satisfy without giving enough to actually close the distance. You made the choices that maintained the surface. You know that. And knowing it makes the loneliness feel less like something that happened to you and more like something you built. Both are true. The circumstances made it easy to stay shallow, and you chose the shallow when depth was available. Sitting with both of those at once is the most honest place to start from. Think about the people currently in your life, the ones you see most regularly, the ones you would call friends if someone asked. Now think about what they actually know about you, not the facts, where you work, what you did last weekend, the surface details of your daily life, what they know about you underneath the facts, what worries you, what you want, what you are trying to become, what you are afraid of becoming, what you have not figured out yet. How much of your actual inner life do they have access to? And now, think about the last time you had a conversation that went somewhere real. Not a good conversation. Good conversations happen all the time, and they are not the same thing. A real one. One where something was said that hadn't been said before, where the surface was broken and something underneath it became visible, where you left the conversation knowing something about another person or yourself that you didn't know when it started. When was that? How long ago? With whom? Because here is what close friendship actually is. It is not proximity, and it is not history, and it is not affection, though it can involve all of those. It is the repeated experience of being seen accurately, of someone knowing the real version and choosing to stay, of a relationship that has survived the full range of who you are, including the parts you are less comfortable with, and remained. That experience, that specific experience of being fully known and still wanted, is what you are missing. And it does not happen by accident. It happens because two people, at some point, decided to stop performing for each other. And the performing stopped because one of them, usually just one, usually whoever has slightly more courage in that particular moment, said something real first. That person can be you. It has to be you sometimes. You cannot wait for everyone else to open the conversation you actually want to have. You cannot stay at the surface and expect someone else to pull you deeper. You have to be the one who says the real thing, who asks the real question, who admits the real uncertainty, even if it is awkward, even if it doesn't land the way you hoped, even if the other person doesn't quite meet you there. Because the alternative, staying where you are, at the pleasant and insufficient surface for another year and then another, is a choice too, just a very quiet one. You do not need many close friends. The research is clear on this, and it matches what most people intuitively know. The quality of the connection matters far more than the quantity. One person who knows you fully is worth more than 50 people who know your name and your job and what you ordered last time you were at dinner together. One person who you can call without a reason, who you can be honest with without performance, who would notice the difference between the public version of you and the real one. That one relationship changes the texture of everything. So the question is not how to build a large social circle. The question is who is already in your life, already there, already connected to you at some level, who has the potential to be that person. Not a stranger, not someone you have to find, someone already present who is waiting, perhaps without knowing it, for you to take the conversation somewhere real. Someone who has given you small signals of wanting to go deeper and to whom you have responded with enough to maintain, but not enough to actually cross the threshold. That person exists in your life, almost certainly, because people are rarely as incapable of depth as we assume. We assume the surface is what they want because the surface is what we have offered, and the surface is what they have offered because it is what we have received without signaling that we wanted more. The mutual maintenance of shallow connection is an agreement that nobody consciously made, which means it can be changed without a formal negotiation. It can change because one person, just one, just once, says something real first and waits to see what happens next. The loneliness you are describing is not permanent. It is not who you are. It is the natural result of two things converging: a life that got busy in ways that compressed friendship, and a set of habits around connection that never quite learned to go deep. Both of those things can change, not overnight, not without awkwardness, not without some conversations that don't land the way you hoped, but they can change, one real sentence at a time, one honest question at a time, one moment of choosing depth over the comfortable, insufficient, familiar surface. You have been circling the room for long enough. It is time to walk into the conversation you actually want to have. Somebody in your life is waiting for you to start it. They may not know they're waiting, but they are. Next episode, there is a person who is always in motion, always working, always achieving, always building toward the next thing. And when you ask them what they do for fun, they give an answer, but even as they give it, they are not sure it is still true. The engine is running, not because they love the speed, because stopping is when they find out what's in the passenger seat, and they are not sure anything is there. That one is next.